Hi, everybody, and welcome to my Leadership Flush Talk. My name is Karen Edge, and I am an academic at UCL at the Institute of Education. And I am coming to you live at the moment from a very empty flat. I've been waiting to record my Leadership Plus video, which is sort of a guide and a signpost to the resources that you'll find possibly below, maybe above, that will be coming over the next couple of days and weeks. But I've given up waiting. So we are here in London in the morning in an office that is really empty, and we're just going to give it a go and see how we do. So first of all, thank you very much for the invitation. It is always my pleasure to join colleagues in Scotland. I will tell people that on a regular basis. It is one of my favorite places to work. And for our Leadership Plus talk, what we decided to do was to focus on well-being, but not just in a traditional sense, looking at some of the factors and conditions that we can control in terms of our own well-being, but also in terms of the well-being of those that we follow and those that we lead. So what I wanted to do was just sort of walk you through some of the ideas and topics that we talked about in the session and give you a bit of food for thought and a bit of things to think about before we head into. At this point, we're heading into a holiday season and a bit of a break, but wherever you are, if you can take a little bit of time, take your 15 minutes and just pause and give a think about sort of what is it that you have within your control and what is it that you can do to help yourself and to help others move through the world in a bit more of a kinder and gentler way. So one of the things that I always put up in front of all of the lectures that I do, and colleagues in Scotland will laugh, so I was very close to Post-it notes, is a video and a picture that has sort of a circle on it. It's by Liz and Molly, and the resources will be there, that says sort of what someone is going through and then what it is that you can see about what they're going through. And I think this is sort of one of the guideposts for how I consider leadership and how I consider the important role of leaders in not just taking what they see at face value, but understanding that those that they work with might be dealing with a lot more. So one of the things that I wanted to frame our talk with today is thinking about what is it that you have within your control. At the moment in Scotland and in many jurisdictions in the world, it feels for many of us who work in education that there isn't much we have control over. You read in the newspapers all the time that workload is escalating, that there's difficulty within school buildings. But one of the things that the Leadership Plus team and I talked about is that you do have a lot of control over how you treat other people. So even when there are accountability frameworks or other things that may be dictating the kind of conversation that you need to have topic-wise, you always have a choice about talking to and working with someone with a care and kindness that I think will make a massive difference. And if we start thinking about educational change from not the bottom, but if we start thinking about it from within the school, what can we do about changing those relationships? I think that would be really helpful. So in the talk, one of the things that we talked about was flourishing. And you'll hear lots of sort of chat about flourishing at the moment. I think it's going to end up being sort of the word at one of these points. But flourishing, defined by the OECD and other organizations, is an individual's ability to thrive in the circumstances that they find themselves in. So we did a little bit of work within the talk about flourishing. And when you take a look at the slides below, you'll see a link. And in the link, just after the flourishing slides, what you'll be able to do is click through and do a quiz based on the Harvard Flourishing Program about sort of how does your life at the moment situate you in terms of your ability to flourish. I find this to be really, really helpful in terms of understanding, what do you need to do next in order to be able to find a bit more calm and joy, perhaps. And it's really helpful at helping you rebalance certain things. Two of the things that we talked about that I think are really important and are taking up a little bit more of my academic time at the moment is notions of respect and incivility. So I am Canadian. I am not American. Many of my American academic colleagues and colleagues around the world are a little bit worried about some of the acts of incivility that we see emerging both in the US, in the UK, and in Canada, and in other parts of the world. But one of the things that I wanted to learn a bit more about was, how does respect actually play out in the workplace? So after a little bit of research, and you'll see this in the slides, one of the questions that I'll always get asked is sort of, why are my slides not necessarily too dense. The PowerPoint police are not going to come and get me, but there's a lot of words on the slides as opposed to pictures like someone else will use. And one of the reasons why I do that is so that when I'm gone, you can actually go through the slides and be able to pick out sort of what's important to you and what you might want to use later. So within the respect section of the talk, what's really interesting, I think, is some of the research evidence that breaks down what is the influence of respect in the workplace, and in particular, what is the influence of feeling disrespected in the workplace. So there are issues, sort of even just sort of single interactions of disrespect, which then points to why leaders need to be quite cautious about how we work with and how we deal with the people that work around us. Even single acts of disrespect where someone feels like they are not being valued can have knock-on effects in terms of their work engagement, in terms of their attendance, in terms of their willingness to engage and provide solutions to make where they work better. So this is actually quite important, I think, especially within education at the moment. And our leaders have a much more difficult job when perhaps in a system educators don't feel like they're terribly valued or respected at times. And that means that there's more responsibility on the leader to try and create those conditions of respect. So if you can take a look at those resources, disrespect is on the rise every year in terms of measures of disrespect. The statistics keep getting bigger and bigger in terms of the number of people who feel like they are not being respected in the workplace. As leaders, I think we have a lot to do in terms of pausing for a moment and thinking about, are we actually leading in a way that makes the people we work with feel respected? And then that will actually come down to how individuals feel respected and go down to personalization in terms of how we manage our teams. But just holding that notion of respect, I think, can be really helpful. The second thing that we talked about, or probably the third thing or fourth thing, was around incivility. And you see incivility in the press more. I think incivility could be one of those words of the year at some point. But one of the things that's interesting about incivility is that it's speech or behavior that's perceived to be rude or unsociable. And when you think about daily interactions and, even getting to work. So I'm back in London, I've been driving the car. I can drive in Ottawa or in other countries, and there's way less honking and anger. There's way less swearing. And it's not just at me. I'm observing, I'm quite a good driver, but I'm observing it on the roads between other people. And it means that by the time you get to your destination, you're not necessarily feeling sort of whole and calm. So incivility is everywhere. It's why we have signs up everywhere saying, please treat our employees with respect. So again, one of the things that I've done in the slide pack that you can take a look at is I've pulled some resources that I think will be really helpful. So when an individual feels that they're in an environment or someone has been rude or unkind to them, they have a decrease in performance, a decrease in involvement, but also in terms of organizational costs, it can be really difficult because it changes the nature of how the organization works. So I've popped in a resource called the Civility Code, which is a set of really interesting questions about if you were going to try and create some conditions where kindness and civility was going to guide your work. These are some of the things to think about. So finally, one of the resources that we shared was based on a paper that I've recently written with Professor Sharon Cruz, who is from the United States, and it was in the Journal of Educational Administration, and I'll pop the paper into our resources as well. But one of the things we were really interested in is that given the conditions that most educators are working in, there's quite a few instances where individuals are going off on stress leave or illness leave as a in relation to the work that they have been doing. And what we found really interesting in our conversations about our experience in England versus our experience in Canada versus the United States and other countries was that so often when someone goes off on an illness or stress leave, when they come back, it's not necessarily treated as what has the organization done to create the conditions for this to happen. The way it's treated is, Karen hasn't been resilient enough. There was too many things going on in her life. What can we do for Karen to be able to make a choice about what she's going to do in terms of managing her energy and time going forward? And what we started to realize was when the instances of exhaustion and burnout and time off work are so high. And in some schools or some organizations, they are higher than what you would assume would be the average. Perhaps it's time to stop and borrow from some of the wider business organizational literature that's looking at organizational exhaustion or institutional exhaustion, and to reframe discussions about why is it that Chris was unable to keep working because of stress, and why is it that Karen can't keep working because of stress, and what can we do as an organization to try and identify what the conditions are that are making it so difficult, and find a way to sort of push back against the odds. I have a lot of faith in schools in Scotland and leaders in Scotland, and I think that remembering that you have the ability to push back against what the odds are. So if the odds are you will have X number of teachers that may be going off on stress leave, push back against that and say, okay, so what are we going to do in our school that we can do for relatively little money, which I know is important in every school in the world at the moment, for relatively little money that may change the nature of how we treat each other and address some of those symptoms or factors that are causing individuals to not feel respected or to believe that they work in a workplace that is rife with incivility. What can we do in order to address issues of exhaustion for an individual and make it part of our collective work together? So the World Health Organization has actually established that burnout is a workplace-related illness. So they have flagged this as something that we need to look at and work on as leaders and organizations around the world. So in the pack, you'll see a set of resources on burnout, which is specific job-related stress. You'll see some resources on how we traditionally consider when an individual is burnt out, and that is the individual's responsibility and their inability to be resilient and to cope and all of those other amazing things that make us feel not great. And then what can it actually mean to look at burnout and exhaustion in an organization collectively? So what's interesting, I think, is considering the fact that so much of what happens in organizations when something is going really well, there's a happiness contagion or a pride contagion, that the work that you're doing is being recognized and that individuals that you work with are feeling more buoyant. But that also can actually happen the other way. So many of us will have worked in organizations where you have a small group of people who are really unhappy, and their conversations with others then lead to those people questioning whether or not they are really content in the workplace, and it starts to cycle. So there's new bodies of research. I've popped a couple into the resources from our talk that look at sort of what do we need to start considering about the social contagion nature of exhaustion and burnout, and what can we do in organizations to take some small steps, the things we can control, to make a difference to the people that we work with. So hopefully there's a set of resources in there that will give you some moments for pause, for thinking about, how do you like to be treated with respect? What does respect look like for you? And how can you start infusing those that you work with to start pausing and thinking about the interactions that they have with individuals? As our work gets quicker, as the demands on us get greater, sometimes that's when it's most difficult to be kind. I see this in my own teaching. I've had to warn my students sometimes that, I've moved house and I was in 4 countries and I'm teaching 4 modules, and my traditional level of patience, which is very, very high, might be a little bit lower today. So if you're going to ask me a question or you're going to give me a suggestion on how we can make things better, please wrap that in sort of a bundle with a bow, because my individual ability to deal with that at that particular moment is difficult. So we are encouraging all of the leaders that participate in Leadership Plus to, pause, to hear it when we say thank you, and to be able to move your own work forward. So my son is trying to call. We are heading to Wales in about an hour. I had threatened him with, if he slept in like he did yesterday when I went to collect him, that he was going to be in a massive amount of trouble. So to demonstrate his commitment to being up, he's been calling me every 15 minutes. I thought we could get through 15 minutes without a call from Isaac. However, we can't. So just pause. Just understand that without you, our families and our kids would not be able to move through their days as smoothly or to feel as loved as they do. And, we had a conversation in the live chat about the difference that schools have made to my own son. I have a 14-year-old named Isaac. Um, and I just want you to hear the thanks that you make a big difference, to think about how you are treating the individuals in your life and what a difference you make with each one of those individual interactions. So thank you again. I'm going to send another video with some responses to the questions that were asked, but I figured I would just give you a bit of a guide of some of the conversations we had in our live chat. So have an amazing, whatever the period of time is after you're watching this video. Make yourself a cup of tea and enjoy your time. But reach out if you have any questions or any comments. My contact information is at the end of the slide deck, but you can also just find me by Googling Karen Edge at UCL. All right. Thank you. Good luck with all your Leadership Plus work. Bye.